In this exercise, we're going to change the storm motion in the radar display controls and set the DMD filters. So first, let's go to WFO scale under the scales menu. Under the frames count, we're going to go to 120 frames. And then under KCRI, we're going to load the all tilts base data. All right, when this comes up, we're going to go ahead and hit the dot key on the keypad to toggle over to reflectivity. Then we're going to use the up arrow to tilt upward, and it's going to cycle over to the 0.5 degree tilt at 2338. So we're going to look at this storm way up to the northeast on the Oklahoma-Kansas border up here. I'm going to left click and drag on that and then zoom in using the scroll wheel. So now I've got this storm at long distance from the radar at 2338. I'm going to drag it and move it over there, and we're going to use the left arrow keys to step backward in time to 2306. Give you a second to catch up to this. Meanwhile, we'll look at this segment in here. If I hit the dot key on the keypad to see what velocity looks like, we see that there's some cyclonic shear in here in this middle cell in this line segment. If we look at the upper left panel, and if we look at the base velocity on the upper right, then those velocities, if I go ahead and zoom in, and I have my mouse settings set so that if I just double click and hold, then I can roam around this display. The long left click set to sampling. Got 75 knot outbound velocities on one side, so there's cyclonic shear there. But if you notice, it's really dominated by the outbound velocities with this velocity display. You can see a couplet in there, but it really doesn't pop out much. A little bit better on the SRM with a 289 at 14 storm motion, but your storm motion will be different than mine because that was what was entered the last time this motion was entered in the custom storm motion. So let's go ahead and under the Tools menu, we're going to load the radar display controls. Alright, when that comes up, we can see that the custom storm motion being used is 289 degrees at 14 knots. And I'm going to drag this over a little bit so I can see this a little bit better. Alright, so let's say we want to update the storm motion, and I have done some analysis outside of this, and the motion should be more like 270 at 34 for this cell that's kind of gusting out, moving eastward. So I'm going to dial my direction down, and I can just hold down this to go to 270 degrees and 34 knots. So let's look at what that did to the velocity display. If I zoom in on that, we see that in the upper right, again, your eye is distracted by this very strong outbound velocities and the base velocities. But what the effect of that motion estimate did was to increase the inbound velocities and enhance that peak, so it kind of pops out a little bit more. And if I toggle over to kind of reflectivity here again, we could just kind of see that pattern stand out a little bit more when you have the peak inbound and the peak outbound velocities being more balanced. Now it just so happens that for a lot of storms with mesocyclones, if inside the reference frame of the storm motion, that if you look at it from that perspective, those couplets are usually pretty balanced. It's when you have really strong translating velocities that it kind of changes the perception of the rotation signature on the radial velocity display. So all we're doing is we're entering a storm motion to bring out the appearance of those peak velocities just so our eyes can see it better. When we do a rotational velocity calculation across this, it doesn't matter what storm motion you estimate. The velocity difference in rotational velocity you calculate on base velocity and SRM will always be the same, because it's a rotationally invariant quantity. It's Galilean invariant, and so it really doesn't depend on reference frame for the shear calculation. So this is just purely to make these signatures pop out a little bit better for mesocyclones when we know we're looking for mesos, so let's get the storm motion right so we can see these peak velocities on the inbounds and outbounds a bit better. There's a couple other storm motion techniques we can use. We can use one from the average storm motion from STI, from the STI product, and if we use that, we see that the inbound velocities actually show up a little bit more pronounced, and that pattern kind of gets drawn out a little bit better than it does with base velocity. So it really doesn't matter that much which one you use, as long as those peaks are drawing your attention to features that are important. You obviously most of the time want to use the actual storm motion, but it's just one of those things that's mainly for convenience of the human eye, kind of picking out these patterns. If we tried the storm motion from Warngen track, my motion track was 240 at 49, and it really brings out the inbound velocities almost too much, so this is probably not representative for this storm. But you can see there's again, that storm motion from the Warngen track, that comes from the distance speed tool. It's the same one that's used from the tools menu. So if you're doing Warngen, the last one that you use the distance speed tool, it'll use that motion. If you're doing the distance speed tool from the tools menu, it'll also use that motion, that last one that you've set. So I'll go ahead and I will go back to my custom storm motion, kind of leave it there for now. And we'll go on to another feature of the radar display controls, and that's the minimum feature strength. If we go ahead to the KCRI menu, we go down here to the algorithm overlays and go to DMD, the digital mesocyclone detection product. If we zoom out and look at all these circles that the DMD tracks, and again it tracks all sorts of features from very weak ones to very strong ones, my minimum feature strength is set at 3. So if I want to see if I want to filter out more of those circles and maybe go to the basic definition of a mesocyclone with the DMD is usually more like a strength rank of 5. And that's more that moderate rotation when you're getting around 30 knot rotational velocities. So it's starting to become more moderate rotation. It's right at the kind of the border there. If I just want to look at strong, moderate to strong rotation, then if I do a filter out everything underneath a 7, then I see I only have a few detections in my display. If I'm in the situation with like tropical rain bands and they're producing tornadoes with very weak rotational velocities, sometimes I might dial this down to something very small just to be able to pick out whatever shear is out there if it's a situation that doesn't have a lot of shear in the environment. Now this situation has tons of circulations everywhere, and that is definitely too much to try and view through. So it's all user adaptable, so the user gets to choose how much of the circles and how much tracking you want to display. So there's other radar display controls for some of the algorithms that we won't cover. They aren't used as much, but the main ones is custom storm motion and the DMD filter. The other thing is, I'll point out, the enable sales frame coordinator is checked on the bottom here. That's important to do not touch that, let that be. That's going to allow your extra sales tilts, that are those 0.5 degree tilts that are the extra ones in the volume scan. If you have this selected, when you're on one of those extra sales tilts and you tilt upward, then it's going to go to the next highest tilt in the volume scan. Let's go ahead and we can look for a display here. I'm going to toggle off the DMD by left clicking on it, and we'll step through and we'll see here we are on a sales tilt 2308. If we tilt upward with the enable sales frame coordinator checked, it's going to go to the 2306 0.9 degree tilt. So this way you're always kind of able to sample, to step through a volume of radar data whether you're on the extra sales tilt or not. And this is the most intuitive way to view all tilts data, just like GR2 analysts. So don't touch the sales frame coordinator button. Always leave it on. If you check it off and you're on that extra sales tilt, you try and go up, it doesn't go anywhere. It's very unintuitive. It's easy to get lost. It's hard to navigate through volumes, and you just don't need that when you're looking at all tilts. So leave that checked and you're going to be fine. And as long as you don't deselect it, then that should be the most intuitive. So that's a quick introduction to the radar display controls for the storm motion and the DMD filters and the don't touch the sales frame coordinator.